Awesome. So thank you for being here and thank you for inviting us. My name is Gerhard Poul, and I'm a solutions architect at AWS based in Vienna. And I've worked the last 4.5 years with Raiffeisen to guide them also on their journey to the cloud and helping all of the different network banks. And today I have the honor of introducing you to what we can do around developer productivity with generative AI. So just for a show of hands, who here has not played with generative AI so far? Cool, awesome. So not really a lot of hands that are completely unfamiliar with generative AI. And just to touch base, right? What is generative AI basically, right? So we're talking about models that are trained on large bases of knowledge, basically everything that's on the internet or the information that we can feasibly get, right, and train AI models on. And then we can use these models essentially as black boxes, right? So we put some text into this model as an input, and we get an output of this model that just basically estimates or gives us an expectation of what an answer might be for the questions we have, right? And one thing that a lot of times comes up around this topic is hallucinations. And when we think about what developers really do all the time, right? We're not looking for the effective answer, right? So we're not using this as Wikipedia in our jobs, but we rather want creative answers for helping us develop new functions or new functionality that wasn't there before, right? So I really argue that this is actually functionality that we expect and want in this environment, right? So will AI ever replace developers is the elephant in the room generally, right? And I think one thing that we have seen in the past, right, from everything around automation that we introduced, right, was that we just saw productivity of individual developers go up, and us just being able to deliver more with less, right? And I think that's exactly what we can expect with generative AI. And if you look at what developers and also solution architects, right, do a lot, there is a lot of benefit that we can get from these generative AI models in a lot of these cases that you see on the slide here. And I just want to now take you through a journey of different functionality that we can have and where we can use generative AI productively for us. And first, to also introduce you around the technology, I also want to introduce you to a concept that we use at Amazon that we call the two-pizza team, which is basically what we want as a unit is development teams that are agile and independent of each other. So we don't want this communication overhead between different teams, and we want to keep team size small enough to feed them with 2 American pizzas. So this is like 2 American pizzas, we generally say up to like 10 people, right? And this is like the internal guideline that we use for our team sizes to keep things efficient and flowing so that these teams really then also can communicate via APIs. So these teams then reuse the other teams' APIs and don't have fixed communication dependencies between each other. And that gives us a lot of speed. And agility. Cool. So how can we make developers more productive? And we will start this with planning, right? So we will go through the different stages of what development teams do. And what you see here is a tool called Amazon Q that we can then use to ask questions about what we have, for example, on our Confluence wikis, right? So when you think about all the wiki content that you have that contains your information and architecture documentation. This helps a new developer, for example, reason or ask questions about how these systems really work. And you get answers here, not only in textual form, but you also get the reference then to the documentation on the Confluence Wiki. And we can also use this for architecture and design questions. So when we, for example, want to learn about a specific behavior of an EC2 instance, right? We can use this in the AWS console. And there is now a side tab on the right hand of the screen where you can open this in an AWS console and ask questions about different topics. So this also works, for example, for billing questions. If you want to find out what is the most expensive service in my account and how can I then reason about reducing the cost, for example, that's definitely a good place also to start here. And I think that's a great way for people to really start with the journey on AWS to make this easier. If we look now at issue tracking, what can we do around here? Because we now had these facts, right? But now we can also ask regarding a new feature that we are trying to introduce, right? So we're asking Amazon Q now about a new feature we want to release in our application. And then we can also use a functionality that already can create a Jira issue based on this and already has the information in there that we generated in the model to then create the Jira issue in our tracking system. And that is really the idea of making this whole process easier, gathering all of this information back into our tracking systems and improving the cycle times. So let's now go to the development and test systems. And one thing that we are seeing really in the last year is more and more of the developer systems, like not the IDE itself, but just the development backend really also moving into the cloud. And that's mostly really around repeatability. So the same thing that we have seen also with Docker containers, where we get all of this repeatability. We can do the same thing on these cloud development environments as well, and make sure that every developer on our team then has the same environment and tests from the same base. And then we can use also the same environments to run all of our automated integration testing as well. So this just makes this whole process much easier and generates really less variance between our unit testing and our development environments. One functionality that most of the people that played with generative AI are probably most familiar with is this generative code aspect, right? Where we can go into a functionality like a Lambda console and then have an integrated way of there just asking the system to generate a function, right? So here you see the function being generated from the system, and the same doesn't only work in the Lambda console, but the same thing can also work in an IDE like Visual Studio Code. And more importantly, it not only works with regular source code, but it also works, like you see here behind me in this demo, on CDK projects. And that's our cloud development kit that allows you to do infrastructure as code. So you can also then use this functionality to already get basically an advanced template, right, to get you started. So this will not get you 100% where you want to be, but for example, to get a template that really also is customized for your project, to get an API gateway, to get all of the dependency and Lambda functions defined in your CDK project. That is something that you can already use these generative AI systems for and really speed up your development. And now let's look at something really cool where we can assign an issue to our Amazon queue. So we already saw that this can be a chatbot, but in this case, you see an issue in Code Catalyst, which is our code issue tracking system. And here you see an issue that is asking for to generate a new documentation in a README, and it also says to develop some detailed rundown of the content of the source repository. And this you can then assign to Amazon Q, and Amazon Q will go in, will fetch the source code, will go into the instructions that it saw in the issue, and will generate a pull request for you. So this then comes back like a regular pull request from a junior developer or something, and you can then look at this pull request. You can also still, of course, change it, right? Or do your iterations or just reject it completely. But for easy changes, right, that are just a lot of work, this is a really nice way of making these mass changes and getting also this productivity enhancement of having an additional junior developer on your team. So now going away a little bit from generating code, the other things we can generate are, for example, SQL. So what you can see on this slide is a SQL that was generated from the chat window that you see on the right-hand side here. And it also adds in the notebook that you see on the left, the comment that was used in the notebook, and it generates this for you. So this is probably not very useful for the general developer, but we also have this functionality in our reporting tools, where you can then go in as also as a business user or a report analyst and really ask questions to get queries generated for the questions that you have and for the reports that you want to generate. And I think you can really see the trajectory here, because if this can be extended over the next few years to really reason about more complex queries and help you in your applications, also maybe find errors in SQL statements or really finding things that are more complex, then I think this really can be a very powerful tool that helps us to completely reduce a class of errors that we see in source codes. And that is a really nice and cool perspective for me. The same can be said around integration. So what you see here on the right is very simplistic. So essentially what this generates is just an input and an output, including a filter. So this writes data that it reads into DynamoDB and generates a default filter code. So this is basically an advanced template, right? But if you think about how this can be used in the future, this can be extended to, for example, also map between data formats, right? And then it makes system integration much easier than what we're used today, where we need to go in, look at the data structures manually, and then map all of those fields. And I think that that's also one of the areas where we can get a lot of improvements there. Now let's now switch to something that is also a little bit always a pain for people, right? If we have to use the command line on a system that we might not be that familiar with. And we recently acquired a company called Fig that had this automation that you see behind me that helps you on OS X just figure out what are the parameters and the things that I can do on the command line. So that's basically a way of seeing how to use commands. And the nice thing here is that this also helps you to use commands that you might not have used before or haven't really tried. And that's also, if you have new people on your team, that's a really cool thing. And one of the really awesome features is what you will see on the next slide, because the last one was not really generative AI, right? But what we added to this tool is really a capability to translate text to shell output. So for example, you can ask the shell to generate a command that then can copy files here to S3. But you can think about also all of the find parameters, right? That you might have just heard about. And then can ask this, yeah, show me all of the files that have, for example, a modification date in the last 2 days. It's always a pain in the ass to find out whether I need to specify this in seconds or in minutes or in some other mechanism. And this really helps a lot with doing this and helps you find out how to maybe also improve what you're doing. Because maybe you got used a long time ago to use a tool in a specific way, and that really can help you to figure out new things and new ways of working. So let's now look at debugging and troubleshooting, which is probably the most annoying things of developing new things, right? Because it's not really doing anything new, it's just figuring out why something broke again. And here you can see we get an internal server error from an API gateway, and we now need to figure out why this happens. So what we do on the next slide is we go to the Lambda console that's behind this API gateway and reproduce this error on the Lambda console. So we just provide the same inputs. We see that the same error comes up here. And with that, we can then click on a button that says, let me troubleshoot this with Amazon Q. And what this essentially tells you from the troubleshooting steps is that this needs an environment variable. So someone deployed this Lambda function that didn't really know that there's an environment variable that needs to be set, and this thing otherwise just explodes, right? Because the variable is not defined. And what we can do with this is not only follow this step-by-step guide, but we can then use this in our IDE to ask Amazon Q to generate us the code for CDK. So to find out how can we now in infrastructure as code add this environment variable that is missing in the Lambda function and fix this once and for all in our infrastructure as code so that future deployments don't even run into this problem. And that's a really nice way to make this persistent, right? And also don't have these problems all over again. So one of the last things that I want to introduce to you is refactoring functionality that we are building. And one of the first things that we introduced, because we use this internally at Amazon, is a functionality that allows you to migrate Maven projects from Java 8 and Java 11 up to the latest Java 17. And that will upgrade your dependencies and also the source code style in the project. And that's one of the first functionalities that we released. And here you can see what comes out of this pull request, where it changes like your POM file for Maven and also then changes the source code. But we are also working on expanding this to other functionalities where there is a lot of churn and just automation can really help a lot. And one of the key things that we already announced is a functionality where we can take .NET Framework applications that run on Windows OS. So for example, web applications that run on .NET Framework, and bring them onto .NET Framework to be compatible on Linux and run them on Linux EC2 instances. So now the question that remains, right, with what you have seen now, how can you use this in your own applications and how would you go ahead with this? And one thing that I want to introduce, and my colleague will also go into more detail in the next presentation, is Amazon Bedrock. And that's our service that provides several foundation models for you via an API. So we are providing via the AWS Marketplace multiple models that you can choose from and then utilize via API calls and just pay for use. And here you see an example just for illustration of a translation case where we translate a string into 3 languages. On the left side, you see the request that is going to be sent in, and you see the response on the right. So this is standard documents that you would be used to, and it becomes really easy to integrate this functionality. And I think this is also where most of the interesting use cases in the future will also come from, where we will see this functionality being integrated into individual applications to use these AI models more broadly and not only have these chatbots. So I think where the puck is really going is that we will see more and more of these automations and functionalities being used more broadly, and also integrations into these applications. And to facilitate people to get them familiar with Amazon Bedrock and the AI technologies, one thing that we are doing is, for example, our game days, where we have our generative AI unicorn party that we ran, I think 2 weeks ago at Summit Berlin, where I was in Berlin with a bunch of my solution architecture colleagues, and we're essentially running a 1.5-hour workshop with different teams to really compete against each other and solve challenges with generative AI. So we give them 3 different challenges that they need to solve in 1.5 hours, compete via points, and that's a really fun way to get people to experience this technology. And we will have the same thing also in September at our AWS Summit in Zurich as well. Cool, and with that, thank you very much. And